everybody. Welcome. Hola, bienvenidos. My name is Regina Sanz. I am beyond thrilled to be here. Wanted to take a quick moment and thank everybody for being part of something that I think is a really important cultural movement that Gabriela and Lydia and Maria have put together. We're going to scream loud in a little bit and make sure that they really understand all the hard work that they've been doing is important. They've really created a beautiful place, space, and purpose for the Latinx and the Hispanic community, especially here in Napa Valley, and who knows, much beyond. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, first of all, we're going to talk about Pinot Noir Sin Fronteras, and this will come into our conversation here momentarily. I'm joined by two incredibly fabulous panelists. We heard a bit from Brianne Cohen earlier, and I always mess this up, so I'm going to make sure that I have my notes in front of me. Brianne is a certified sommelier, wine educator, consultant, and wine writer based in Los Angeles. Give it up for Brianne. Woo! And introducing Mr. Gabe Zarate, wine director for Contento in New York, Sobersom via Instagram. Very much looking forward to having that conversation as we go on today. Director of Impact, Board of Directors at Corporate Pero Latinos. Let's give it up for Abe. I'm going to hand it over to our panelists here in just a moment to talk a little bit about their backgrounds and sort of what brought them to. In this summit, we're going to talk about the wine industry in particular, obviously, because that's all of our backgrounds, but happy to open up to conversations specifically for hospitality, which we'll be really leaning on Abe to be talking about as well. But if there are some specific spirits questions in the spirit of being a Hispanics in wine, beverage, hospitality, wine, and spirit, we're happy to talk about those as well. I would love for this to be somewhat interactive. We'll do kind of our little spiel, and then we'll get into wine tasting. We're going to be talking about Pinot Noirs from all over the world. And if there's something you're dying to contribute, ask, whether that be about the wine specifically or about some of the subject matter that we're hoping to cover, raise your hand. Let's have a chat. This is about community. So why Pinot Noir Sin Fronteras, and why am I here talking to you, and who the hell am I? Well, I'll talk a little bit about my background and why these things tie together. I started out my wine career, I suppose you could say, or just my career, living in San Diego. I was in college, I was working in restaurants, and I was making my way to become a professional snowboarder. I was bartending, I was working in hospitality, and it was a means to an end for me to go snowboard on the weekends. But I always had a place to come back to and make money, because let me tell you, you don't make shit. Hopefully that doesn't offend anybody. Yeah, that. You don't make shit for money as a professional snowboarder, especially way back then. So I definitely needed to work in a restaurant in order to be able to support my career, my life, everything. Made it, woo! Did it for about 3 solid years, and at the ripe age of 24, I was kicked out of the industry because turns out I was too old. Wah wah, what the hell? That's a TED Talk for another time. So I found myself at this crossroads. I had graduated university, I had studied science, I had been working in restaurants, I got kicked out of the industry that I thought was going to be my shining star. I didn't work in the music industry, which is what I always wanted, and that guidance counselor was fired too. We'll move on from that. I just didn't know what to do. And I got some really good advice. And that's where this conversation starts. I went to a mentor and I said, what do I do? I'm a bit lost. I don't necessarily want to go become a doctor. I don't want to do research. I studied science, but gosh, how does this work? I don't want to go sell pharmaceuticals, gross. What do I do? And she said, Regina, you know, what you really should think about is your cultural heritage. What do you mean? Well, you like to travel, you like to learn, you like to eat, you like wine. Yeah, doesn't everybody like that? She said, no. Why does this matter? I grew up, my mom is from Panama, my dad is from Spain. So I grew up in a household where wine was on the dinner table every single night. Matter of fact, fun story, I actually got in more trouble in high school for stealing a Coca-Cola out of the refrigerator than I did for stealing a little wine out of the bottle, maybe when I was underage drinking, like not that anybody here's ever done that. And the reason for that is that was a part of my culture. It was a part of my community. It was a part of the way that I learned to be in this world. And it was always about coming together at the dinner table, breaking bread, eating good food, sharing stories, and there was always wine part of that conversation. And so my mentor said to me, well, Regina, you know, you have this background, you have this natural history, you have this desire for these things, you have this desire for learning. I think you should really lean into wine because it actually really does allow you to do a lot of these things. It brought me to hospitality. I worked in restaurants in San Diego. I became a sommelier. I worked my way up to becoming the general manager of the restaurant. I then said, okay, that was fun. My feet hurt. I moved to Northern California. I worked for a distributor in 2 very difficult years in 2008. If anybody was working in wine sales at that time, it sucked. And from there, I made my way into working for suppliers. I was at Jordan Winery for a period of time. Most recently, for the last almost 8 years, I was at Costa Brown Winery as part of Darkroom Portfolio. And now I just started at Joseph Phelps Winery, overseeing our global sales and marketing. I tell that story because my journey is not a straight path. It's a lot of this and a lot of, if you were to look at the first page of the book, you would not see that climax, would you? Absolutely not. And what really brought me to that and what brought me here and keeps me here is the culture. The whole purpose of this entire event is to create community, to create culture, and bring the values that we have in a Hispanic community globally to the table. Now, enough on me. I'm going to hand it over to Brienne and to Abe to tell us a little bit about their backgrounds, what brought you to the wine industry, and why are you still here? Take it away.
I have been in business for myself for 17 years now. 2007, if I'm doing the math correctly, is when I started my company doing event production. I actually produce nonprofit events for LGBT and performing arts nonprofits. So that's my background and history. And then along the way, I discovered wine. So my background as a little one is that I grew up in 2 different households. My parents divorced when I was 1. So I had my dad's side of the family, who's from Argentina, which really means we're Italian. And then I had my mom's side of the family, who was like as American as they come. You know, on the table is hamburger helper, Coca-Cola, Cheez-Its, and gummy bears. You know what I mean? Like super just like simple, right? And then on my dad's side of the family, it's like fresh pasta, wine, like exactly what you'd imagine like growing up in like an Italian household is. And so I did have exposure to wine at a young age, and I, enjoyed it, and it was kind of fun and like illicit, because then you'd go to the other side of your family, and my mom was like, he let you have what? I'm like, just a little bit of wine. Nana said it was fine, whatever. And then fast forward, I had been in business for myself for about 10 years doing my event production, and at one point I learned, and this is, at that point I'm probably drinking wine that is between $2 and $4 a bottle. Like that's I'm buying the $2 chuck. I'm the girl in college going to the frat party with a bottle of wine. How embarrassing is that? But I did. And I learned along the way that certain grapes made certain kinds of wine, and that happened in certain places. And I was like, what? I thought it was like table grapes made wine. I don't know. I didn't know anything. And so once somebody told me that, I was like, I have to take a class, and I want to learn more about this. And as I say with wine certifications, they're like Pringles. Once you pop, you can't stop. And so I started with the WSET program, level 1 and 2 and all of that, level 3. Then I thought about the diploma, which was a huge step. But I had been in business for about, I think, 12 years or so at that point, and I love producing my nonprofit galas and fundraisers, but I wanted something else, and so that's when I added the wine side of my business. I worked on the diploma. I made an intentional decision that I was going to add wine into my business in some way, shape, or form, and I didn't know what it was going to end up being. And then where I'm at now is that I still produce my nonprofit galas and fundraisers and capital campaign events, but I also deliver really high quality, interactive, in-person and virtual wine tasting experiences for corporate groups. And I do that, as like a team building, culture building activity through highlighting diverse owned and diverse made wines. So LGBT, female, Black, BIPOC owned and made wines. And there's nothing I love more than tasting and enjoying wine and not having a test at the end. So if anyone here is still in their certifications, or you're just kind of in that world, and we're all always learning, just know that one day you don't have to answer to anyone. You can pull out your phone and use Google. I still do it all the time. I was Googling these wines this morning, making sure I understood them. You don't have to have this encyclopedic knowledge. We can just be regular people enjoying our wine together.
Yes.
Abe, tell us about you.
I still get nervous whenever I have to speak about a wine or anything, but we all do it. We all Google, we all make sure that we know when we need to know, but you don't need to know anything. So I love that, and that needs to be said. I'm Abe. Hi. I guess I'll start with where I grew up, and was born and raised born in Guadalajara, Mexico, and then raised between that city and Laredo, Texas. Moved to Boston for college, went to a music school there, and wanted to work in music publishing, so it was either LA or New York, and I foolishly thought New York would be easier because I knew a couple of people there. I moved and I cried for the first week to, I think Ariana Grande had a new album drop, and I just cried to all her sad songs. But I've been there since 2014, did work in music publishing, really liked it. But to make ends meet, I got a job at a wine bar called Cork Buzz. So that is owned still, it's still open, by a master sommelier of the name Laura Manick. I was really embarrassed one day when I didn't know a question that I just through working there, I felt like I needed to know the answer to. So I took a Wine 101 class. And since then, I just really fell in love with the idea that a couple of ounces of wine, just, this can retain qualities of where it came from, how it grew up, how it was raised, how it was treated, and then continue to develop in the glass the more you spend time with it. I found those to be very human-like qualities. And just kept going. I've been very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. Speaking of Cork Buzz, the person in charge of the beverage program there took me under his wing, and so did everyone else, and I started building a community, eventually transitioned to that career full-time, went through the CMS, et cetera, and now I am at Contento, which is an East Harlem hidden gem in East Harlem, we like to call it.
Phenomenal restaurant.
But yeah, and with publishing, there's just so many, you can, with music background and just the arts in general, there are so many parallels, really. Basically, when I'm, choosing wines to pair to a palate, it's the same thing that I used to do with songs, but for, the TV show or an A&R or whatever it was. So that creative hunger still gets fed and sated.
I love it.
So, yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
How does this side of Pinot Noir? Well, if we were to select one grape variety, perhaps, in the world that best represents really showing a sense of place, showing a sense of culture, and flourishing in different places, I can't think of another grape variety. We think about Cabernet Sauvignon, for example. There are some phenomenal Cabernet Sauvignons, many of which are made here in Napa Valley. But you really don't think about a lot of growing regions for Cabernet Sauvignon, that they truly flourish and they truly become renowned and sought after. We think of Napa Valley, you might think of Bordeaux. What about Pinot Noir, right? This grape grows in New Zealand, Argentina, Chile. We're going to taste a couple of those today. Northern California, Southern California, very different growing regions, very different growing conditions. Oregon, yeah, that place Burgundy, right? That they make it there too. For me, this is a representation in some ways of the Hispanic and Latino community. We're all over the world, people, and we flourish in lots of different places. And why is that? Because Pinot Noir very much shows its sense of place. It brings its flavor to the table. It brings its flavor to the cuisine of that place. And it pairs very beautifully with cuisine from around the world. It isn't a wine that you have to go, oh crap, I have to have a really big steak with this wine, because it is quite flexible as a grape variety. So I thought it'd be really fun to taste through 4 different wines, 4 different Pinot Noirs, mostly 4 different price points actually as well, from 4 different growing regions, and have a dialogue about what's happening in the industry, maybe more on the technically wine side of things for the Pinot Noirs on the table, but also what are some challenges we're seeing that Pinot Noir maybe are a good example to show us, both from a climate change, soil, tariffs was hit on earlier, even just the jargon we're seeing from more social aspects of the industry, and kind of use Pinot Noir as a fun way to do it. So with that, any questions before we kind of jump right in? Rock and roll. Okay. Let's kick it off with the Miguel Torres. Do you want to talk about a little bit about this wine, Brienne?
I'd love to.
And this growing region? Yep.
Yeah. So the first one we're tasting is Miguel Torres from Chile, Cordillera de los Andes. It's their Pinot Noir, $23 for the bottle, 2021 vintage. First, I'll invite you to be smelling and tasting on your own as I'm chatting, because one thing that I really am not into is like when I'm talking about a wine and everyone's just waiting for the permission to do the things and do the things, enjoy while we're talking about it. I think you'll have a more full experience that way.
It is 11:45 a.m. We can start drinking. It is official.
Dig right in, kids.
Jump in.
The first thing I'm going to share about this winery, I'm actually not going to talk about the wine specifically in the glass, but while you're tasting it, I want you to be thinking about this. And this is where some of these bigger conversations happen. And I touched on this in my panel earlier today, that it's not always just about the wine. As much as we love to think it is, it's a really cute idea. It's just not always that way. The real world is different, and wine lovers and enthusiasts don't always go straight to the wine and the technical details. So Miguel Torres is actually a family-owned, fifth-generation family brand that originated in Spain. They have wineries, I think, in a few different places around the world besides Spain and Chile. I think here in Northern California, there might be another place or two. So fifth generation, and they are actually, and you'll notice this is the most value-priced wine on the table. And one of my little isms, that my nugget that I sometimes pull out when people say, "What's your favorite, $10 wine or $15 wine?" It's very rarely going to be Pinot, because in my opinion, I think Pinot, to make solid Pinot at a low price is very difficult. You kind of touched on a little bit. It can be a tough grape. We call it the heartbreak grape. So if you're going to spend 10 or 15 bucks on a bottle of wine, which is no problem because I regularly spend 10 or 15 dollars on a bottle of wine, that's usually not the one I'm going for. But I love that this is a $23 bottle of wine, and let me share with you a little bit about the value of what's in the bottle that isn't just by looking at the glass, smelling it, and tasting it, which is Familia Torres, the larger company above Miguel Torres. They are, I have my little notes here, they're really, really impactful in the world. They're one of the most, I would say, sustainable wine cooperatives in their families in the world. They're really focusing on reducing carbon emissions with their wine, and so much so that the carbon emissions per bottle, they're slated to decrease by 60% by 2030. They will be a zero emission winery by 2040. And when you're that large, that makes a big difference. And they also founded the International Wineries for Climate Action, which is a huge worldwide organization that is looking at wine and its impact on the environment. And you're getting all that for $23 in a bottle. And those are the things that we don't always talk about. It's not about when you think of your tasting notes and the complexity and the different clusters you pull from and flavors. Those are important, but there's also this corporate social responsibility aspect that goes into it. So for 23 bucks, I didn't really connect the dots of everything I just said until 6:30 this morning when I'm taking my notes. And I'm like, this is gonna become now a solid wine and brand that I wanna share to people. And you can find it, it's really easy to find, Miguel Torres wine. So that's just a little bit of background that I wanted to share. Just a couple technical things for those who care. The wine was fermented on native yeast, so not inoculated with commercial yeast. It did go through malolactic fermentation, and it's aged with a little bit of old oak and stainless steel oak. So that's why it's such a fresh, sort of vibrant, fruity, Rudy Tooty, fresh and fruity, as I call these Pinots. I love it. It's just all the fruit up front, really amazing. And just one other little note is that 2021 was a really cool vintage in the area. And this is just a cool region in general. We're in Chile, which is really long. It's right on the coast. It's on the other side of the Andes, so it has a lot of the maritime ocean influences. So to me, this is just vibrant, fresh, juicy, fruity. It's got a beautiful, that really pretty cranberry color that we love from Pinot. Those are just some of my notes and thoughts on the wine. Does anyone want to share anything? Any vibe, any impression, any note, or thumbs up, thumbs down,
thumbs
somewhere
up,
in the
thumbs
middle?
up, thumbs down.
That's what I like
every
to do,
thumbs
right?
up. I like it. Not that was at all coercive, but okay. And I wanted to interject too. One thing that we'll see, which I think is really unique to 3 of the wines on the table, is this idea of maritime influence. And so when you kind of first off to take us up 50,000 feet for a moment, look at this wine. On this table, every single glass is a different color. And for me, if this was all Cabernet Sauvignon, again, I'm picking on Cab, but I work for a Cab house, so I love Cabernet as well. But
we all pick on Cab, I think.
It's a little love relationship. It wouldn't look like this, and that's because the nature of the grape, again, is quite diverse, depending on its growing region, depending on its site, depending on its clonal selection. Praise be, don't let me get started on clones, but if we want to talk about clones, we certainly can. I'll also interject. Show of hands, do we have any winemakers in the room, or is anybody in the room actually connected to one of these 4 wines? Yes.
So we're Jackson Family Wines.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Fabulous. I have the notes here, but we'll double check. So This is good. This is good. Community when it comes to wine, for sure. But for me, with Pinot Noir, especially in the cellar, and touching on what a heartbreak grape means, it is a very challenging grape to grow. So you have to get it right in the vineyard. There is a saying in the wine industry that you can make great wine from great grapes, but you cannot make great wine from bad grapes. It's just like your garden. It starts in the soil. It starts how you take care of the vineyard and what your decisions are. And I think it's quite important, and Abe, I want to jump into you here in a second. I think it's quite important that we take that into a consideration. And I think generationally, our new wine buyers are very interested in this backstory of the wineries. No longer is it, did it get 100 points? Sure, that's still an important part of our zeitgeist when it comes to talking about wine, but that's not the whole story. Especially younger consumers, they want to know where it's come from. I mean, to make a joke, it's like an episode of Portlandia. Like, what was the grape's parents' father's name? And on Tuesday, what sort of sauce do they like to eat? I mean, and that's okay though. It means, to Gabby's point earlier, we have curious consumers. That's really good news. There's been a lot of doomsdaying about the wine industry as a whole, that it's down because younger generation isn't drinking wine. I don't think that's true. I think we just need to show up in a way that tells the story. All of these consumers are desperately interested in storytelling, origin, the why, the where, etc. Yes, please.
So you mentioned that the consumer is interested in the storytelling, the why, the where.
Yeah.
What about the actual buyer?
Ah, perfect segue. Abe,
question.
take it away.
Yes.
Talk to me about your program and how you make decisions for Pinot Noir. Excellent question. It's like I gave that. Thank you.
Community.
We got you.
All together. So I started at Contento early 2022, and then took what I call my sabbatical while I was getting ready for a certification to the Modern, which is a fine dining, Michelin star, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to go back to Contento after the fact because there's just something about, beyond liking, it's just, I'm not one to call anyone at work my family or whatnot, but there's something about caring deeply about the people you are surrounded by for so many hours a week, and having a list, and not just that, but the people behind it represented with their own actions and everything they do outside of the restaurant, so it just naturally distills into it. So in any case, our list created by a sommelier of the name Yannick Benjamin, one of my mentors. He created the sections in a very interesting way, starting on the front page with social impact, which thankfully most of our wines could grab a spot on that page, but we can only have so much on the front one. But we have a little blurb. I like to alternate them to share all those stories, because people don't want to talk to me all the time, and I totally get that. I'm not there to just offer up information. I want to offer it up in a way that makes people feel comfortable, and in that case, if they want to look at the wine list, information's there that will hopefully spark their curiosity, and then we can get as deep into the details as they want to. But that's another point. It's never about me. It's not even about the wine. It was said earlier. It's about the person who chooses to engage with it and in the way that they want to. So social impact, we have hidden gems in the Americas, but a lot of our wines is, I pick them in a way that's maybe an off the beaten path region grape or underrepresented group. If I'm lucky, all three of those, but still very kind of palatable or approachable to the palate, because I think we still need that to be the bridge, the connector into people being open to it. Also lucky that people come in primed to explore to a place like this one. But when purchasing to begin with, I love tasting because that's when I really get exposed to so many new things, people, ideas. But I have noticed over maybe the past year and a half or so, at least on my end, that it's not just myself who's asking these questions. It's other buyers asking about, okay, you're sustainable, but does that go into how your workforce is sustainable? Like, how do you care for the people that work not for you but with you, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very telling, one, whether the sales rep has an answer to that or not, and two, what kind of answer they give me. And it's not necessarily a make or break because there's so many layers to the capacity in a business at the end of the day to fully holistically take care of every single aspect and person within it. So, but as long as there's kind of some, progress, change in the making, there's got to be something because all of that is part of the story. And no disrespect to anyone who works, makes, or loves Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir is Pinot Noir. It's just, it can only be described as so many things. Speaking of the honor, we talk about like the badge of honor of tasting these baller bottles and whatnot. And okay, at some point, it does get kind of like repetitive. It's just like, okay, I get it, Burgundy's Burgundy for a reason. So really, what we're here to do is to communicate and listen more than anything. Listen, and then you can spark curiosity with a follow-up question, tidbit, a taste. It's so much easier at a restaurant to just give someone a taste, no commitment there, and that opens everyone up. So anyway, that's long-winded.
Remind me your name, love. I know we've met. Suhail. Regina, nice to see you again. Really great question. How do you overcome some of the barriers to entry? And please, by the way, if we didn't already say it, taste through everything, go back, see how these wines are evolving. Do not wait, do not stand on ceremony. We're going to talk about Domenico here in just a moment. But the reason I love that question is, look, the landscape of how wine is bought and sold has absolutely changed in the last 4 years especially, but in the last decade for sure. The consumer has changed, the buyer has changed. The term sommelier is a real thing now, where especially if you're a winery and you're trying to work with a distributor or sell directly to a restaurant, obviously, traditionally restaurants have been sort of the gold standard where you want to have your wine because it allows visibility to customers, a hand sell. You hope someone like Abe or myself way back in the day is going to tell the story and really engage with customers and be that sort of OG influencer. But that's evolving now, right? Buyers have less time, and maybe you fortunately have a lot of time, Abe, but I'm guessing not. I'm guessing not. Buyers have less time, buyers have less resources, and that's simply, these are all economic conditions and the reality of life, right? So I'm seeing a lot of buyers now from being on the supplier side and sort of looking at this from a global perspective. They're looking at our social media. They're looking at what we're doing. They're going to my Instagram. Gone are the days of, I'll just put something on social media and my wine list will see it or my wine club will see it. You put it out there, that's your microphone. That's a place where you can tell your message. Buyers are looking at that too. They're going to your website. We all Googled these wines this morning. I've been on every single one of these websites this morning. Great, by the way, with the trade portal for the Matanzas Creek, loving it.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I know that now, right? We're using that digital resource, and we talked a little bit about AI. I think that's going to be coming about in a big way in terms of research.
Just a note on that, it's anyone who works with a winery or any sort of brand. We're doing the work of researching. So making sure that your story is out there, whatever you want to be found, even if it's through AI, that's pulling from existing resources. So making sure that you're making yourself visible in any way that leads to being perceived, because otherwise there's no way that I'm gonna get to meet every single winemaker and be enamored with their story, which always happens. That's the beauty of visiting, right? And just connecting in person. But we gotta use our elements, and I do it for myself. You put out whatever you want. Whatever you think might lead to the right people finding you, if that makes sense.
There was I don't know if this gentleman is in the room right now, but there was a gentleman in the last session that asked about, percentage. What's the best thing you can do basically for marketing? If you're here, sir, please. I don't see him. My answer to this, as many years in this sort of seat, is just update your assets. Honestly, put what you have, put it online, make it findable, make it readable. That's number one. If Abe is like, ooh, this is a cool new producer, and then goes to a website and there's no tasting note, you just lost a chance. And that is, it's a pain in the ass. It takes a lot of time. It takes time to create those assets. But once you've done it, it's done. It exists. It's a tasting note. Just get it online. And that way, you've all of a sudden opened a door that you had never even knew was closed. So, off my soapbox. Brianne, let's talk about Domenico, let's talk about Argentina, let's talk about this wine, and I'd love to talk about the differences between these first two wines.
Yeah, for sure.
Only just across the Andes. It's wild.
So we have Domenico from Laura Catena. Is anyone here Argentine? Am I the only one? Damn it. Yes. Okay, my people, mi gente. Laura Catena she is a force. She is going to be here tomorrow, probably with her red beret, doing her panel tomorrow, so she's going to be amazing. One of the sort of legacy producers in Argentina that is doing so much to elevate and raise the profile of Argentine wine from within, from someone from Argentina, because one thing that Argentina has had historically is a lot of people from other countries coming and buying up vineyards and land and making wine, which I don't think intrinsically is a problem, but I think in order to maintain the integrity of your brand and your place, you got to have the people do it as well. So it's really cool to see Laura and all their successes that they've had. She's, I believe, a third generation winemaker, I think fifth generation grower, if I'm not mistaken. This wine is $40. Domenico is a sort of I don't know if it's a sub-label or if it's a separate label than Bodega Catena Zapata, which is the main label that many of y'all have probably had. Domenico is an ode to her father, Nicolas, and her daughter is Nicola, so that's what she calls it. And the focus here, this is her high altitude Pinot Noir project. So that's really the two differences we're talking about. You mentioned the Andes and the mountains, is we're at around 4,000 feet elevation, so very high vineyards. And then we are on the other side of the Andes, so we have the benefit of sort of the rain shadow effect, more of a continental climate versus a maritime ocean influenced climate. Let me just put my nose in the glass real quick. We are in the Uco Valley, like I said, at 4,000 feet elevation, and one of the things that happens at higher elevation generally, and the thing with wine is we can always be corrected. I can always say something wrong because nothing's black and white. So there's a lot of broad strokes in wine, and I actually say them a lot, but it's also like disclaimer, I don't at me because there's something different or whatever. But high altitude wines tend to have a slower ripening cycle, so it just takes longer for the grapes to ripen. So that's just something that can impact the final wine in the glass. And if you really stick your nose in both of these glasses, the Miguel Torres and then the Domenico, I think there's a little bit of a delicacy on the Domenico that I'm not saying I don't get it in the Miguel Torres, it's just different. I'm getting more floral notes, I'm getting more high tone fruit. I know we hate doing this, but I do it all the time. It's, you compare regions. It is, to me, a little bit Burgundian in nature. It just has the fruit is a little bit more delicate, and there's just a little softness to it. And I think the floral notes add something else as well. One of the other things that I'll speak of with this high elevation that we deal with around, the Andes and whatnot, and also just in a lot of places, and we talked about sustainability, climate change and the impact of that, which is huge in the wine industry. Obviously, the two biggest things they're dealing with are frost and hail. So climate change isn't always it's hotter, it's just these extremes. And so when you have, late season frost, late or early frost, right? We could be talking in the fall, winter, or in the spring, summer. Well, not summer, but you know what I mean. Then you have hail issues and stuff. So, these are things that all of these go into the final cost of the bottle of wine as well. So like for frost, they're igniting the little fire thingies in the vineyard. I forget what those are. I think they're called something. They're doing the fires to displace the cold heat so that the roots and the rootstock doesn't freeze. With the hail, they're doing some netting because there's some extreme hail down there that can really decimate entire crops. So $40. Some of that is going to go into that, the non-romantic side of wine, right? We can talk about the Burgundian floral notes, but those are just some of the differences I got. Abe, what about you, Abe? Do you want to share anything?
Yeah, well, since not to jump to the next wine, but I'm always interested in asking California Chardonnay or Pinot Noir producers or people involved with a winery, if you don't mind, how do you feel, or Matanzas at large, when someone says, oh, your wine is Burgundian in style? Like, what's that do to you?
Well, feel free to correct me, but from my understanding, Sonoma County has similar climatic weather, patterns as Burgundy. And that's one of the reasons why the Pinot Noir grape and the Chardonnay grapes are able to thrive as well as they do. So, on the one hand, yeah, sure, it's a compliment, but at the same time, we are our own. It doesn't matter. We are our own.
Yeah.
On the world stage.
Yeah.
And, and our winemakers work hard, and we should honor the talent that's homegrown. And in this case, Matanzas, the winemaker, is una chilena. So it's like, you know, there's so much beyond the old world style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's been a recurring theme today in all our.
Yeah, and I think that's very, sorry.
I was gonna say, I'd love to enter into
very
that.
true sentiment to what I've kept hearing. Maybe 6 years ago, it was across the board a compliment to be regarded as, oh, this is Burgundy-like or Bordeaux-like of Cabernet, et cetera. But now it's more and more about taking pride in your space, your area, your land, and the people behind it, the talent behind it, like you said. So again, back to story.
Sounds familiar, huh?
Yeah.
It sounds like holding space. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I will say
We
the
just did that.
hard part with it, because I am trying also to move away from certain things in my descriptors of wines and tasting notes and regions. But the one thing I do like about saying it's Burgundian in style, whether you agree or not, doesn't matter, is that you instantly know something. Like you're understanding what I just said and you're going, okay, that helps me put it in a bucket or a place. So an old world, new world kind of does that. So
Yeah.
I'm constantly, we're all constantly evolving and trying to figure out how to communicate better. That's something I'm working on. I'm like, so how can I say that without saying that? Or how can I stop describing old world, new world, using those terms
As an
and
introductory
yeah,
umbrella
so that's
of
the challenge
sorts.
for us. That,
Yeah.
it's awkward before it's elegant, as
Yeah.
they say.
Iman had something?
Yeah.
Curious about you qualifying what Burgundian means to
Yeah.
you, because I think there's two things. One, you mentioned climate. We have very distinctive climates. It's very hot, warm. So when I think about Burgundy, I think about the tertiary notes that stand out. And so that's what a California winery would be trying to accomplish or trying to
Yeah.
achieve with their Pinot Noir. So then what does that mean to you when you say, oh, this is Burgundian nature? Is it because of those tertiary notes as a taster?
Yeah.
Or is it stylistic? Because even within Burgundy,
Yeah.
It's so
there's so much
Yeah.
diversity
Yeah.
of like styles and winemaking techniques. So, and farming, well, farming not really, forget that.
Yeah.
We have the diversity of farming.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm curious about what you guys think.
I think it's reductive, but I also, when you're dealing with someone who might, No. Reductive to say that something is Burgundian in style. Yeah,
Nerds, here we are. We
like the
see-
tasting
we
notes.
see. Yeah.
No, that terminology is reductive for sure. But again, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, even with Old World, what are we calling it? I've veered away from it, and I just say Europe or European and non-European. But that still is kind of these are transitional periods, and we will inevitably hit a period of overcorrection in language, like we have in other areas, and then we'll figure out a meeting point where we can all have a more common understanding. But like you said, even within Burgundy, once you really dig in, obviously that's like the place to really, really dig in. A place like Sonoma, for example, there's true Sonoma. It's all of those parallels even, but I'm in New York, so if this doesn't land, then I'm sorry. But I think of the grapes as humans. You're walking down the street, it's 70 degrees in New York, beautiful, sunny. Then you walk down the very prevalent scaffolding, little wind chill, gets a little chilly, and that could be within the same block, a few feet apart. That's completely a different experience, especially if you were to be planted there and grow and develop there. You would turn into a completely different person. You would turn pale, et cetera, et cetera. So that's also very true. It's figuring out the way to simplify without reducing.
Yeah, agreed. And
which is our job.
And I'd add too, for a little bit of context, I did a seminar series for the last 5 years that was all about blind tasting Pinot Noir from all over the world. For the most part, we stuck to California and Burgundy and Oregon just to kind of keep it fair. And the results we found over 5 years were shocking, right? 90% of the time, that's an exaggeration, we can go look at the stats, but we would find that what our perception of what we thought was, for those of us that have been sort of classically trained in New World, Old World, and what that means, when we actually got to the table and we got to the glass, 90% of the time, it was completely flipped the script, because climate change is a really big part of that. Growing regions in Burgundy are now, I had the benefit of with my previous employer to do a program with making Pinot Noir in Burgundy, with our winemakers from here in Sonoma County, or sorry, there in Sonoma County. And it was really interesting. You know, the conversation between the winemakers was, well, we're having this issue. It's really, really hot here in Burgundy, right? Which is traditionally, for millennia, not, maybe that's an exaggeration, but a long time, that's not been the case, right? And then on the flip side, okay, well, for the first time, what I think is probably in our cultural history when it comes to talking about wine and communicating about wine, we're seeing problems in Burgundy that we've seen in California for years. In Burgundy, there isn't the same area to move outside of. You're within the very strict parameter. In the world outside of Burgundy, I'll just say, there's a lot of different places where Pinot Noir can be grown, and we're tasting 4 of them on the table, right? Without those same restrictions that can kind of get ahead of climate change, if you will. Going back to the quick comment we were making around the ocean, 3 of these wines on the table are highly, highly influenced by maritime influences, both in Chile, here in Sonoma County, and then in Santa Rita Hills. This ocean influence is helping the grapes to not get sunburned, to have a cooling influence, to keep their acidity, to be better quality grapes. But using Santa Rita Hills, and we can kind of jump to that one and we can kind of keep moving around. When we talk about Santa Rita Hills as a growing region, this is a relatively new, and those of you I know who've spent time there, it's not new, but relatively new on the global stage, growing region. It is also the coldest wine growing region in California, and it's near Santa Barbara. That sort of flips your mind a little bit, right? You go, well, why would Southern California be a colder growing region? The way that this particular piece of terroir, this little tiny growing region, a transverse microclimate that brings freezing cold water or air off the Pacific Ocean, allows to create an environment that lets these groups really thrive. The point of all of that is to say, we're going to continue to see Pinot Noir especially crop up in all kinds of places. Already in New Zealand, Germany, there's some incredible Pinot Noirs. It's a grape for me that is about thinking outside the box, thinking beyond borders, thinking how can we work with this really special grape? And there's a reason I think it has such an incredible following globally because of that. Yes?
As it stands today, do you know how the different countries would rank in terms of production of Pinot Noir?
Production, not so much. Well,
Whoa,
plantings,
gosh.
plantings
The only
is
thing
better.
I can share is
Yeah.
I did learn at 6:30 this morning over my coffee that Pinot Noir is 1% of the planted grapes in Argentina. That's all I know. That's
Yeah.
all I got. So very
the
small.
number I can't remember, but
I can't imagine
it's
big for any region.
mostly France, followed by the United States and Germany, and then I don't remember the rest. But those are the top 3. But France is top for plantings production. I don't know.
And I think plantings is an important thing to really think about too. Again, the cost of producing a vineyard, especially here in the United States, can be quite crippling, right? There is a barrier to entry in that, and especially growing a very difficult grape to grow, like Pinot Noir. Now it's even more expensive to grow. To Brianne's point earlier, it's very, very difficult to make an inexpensive, good quality Pinot. You can make a lot of really bad Pinot Noir, but why would we do that? But it's very hard to do. It's very hard to make a good quality, inexpensive Pinot Noir because of that. Because of that, sometimes that's the reality of the business too, right? I do think that there is a certain romance to the wine industry, which we should continue to cultivate absolutely, about community, about breaking bread. But there's an honesty to it. We're the only industry, and I've been argued with before, but I'm going to say it. We're the only industry that really starts in the dirt and ends on the dinner table. Think about that, right? We as a community, as an industry, specifically for wine, we literally grow a plant in the dirt. We then take it into the winery, we produce this wine, we put it in a bottle, we take it out into the world, we sell it to a restaurant, a sommelier then puts it on the table, and somebody buys it. What other industry were you actually that connected from the seed to the dinner table? There's a lot of hands that have to touch that. There's a lot of work that has to go into that. But that's also what makes it so unique and so cool, and why I think it is really so beautifully positioned, and why it has stood the test of time. When we've seen dips in demand, or we've seen challenges in industry, we've seen challenges in workforce, and so on. Abe, I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about, talking about challenges.
Yeah.
hospitality, some programs that you think are really important, your values in a restaurant, your values in the hospitality space. And as we've seen this new world of the hospitality community evolving, top 5, what's your priorities and values there?
Well, hospitality, it doesn't just belong in restaurants. That's number 1. And the most successful people and businesses are the ones that have that in the forefront of their way of operating. Earlier this year, I was still at Contento, but I tried also an office job within wine, but very different vibe, anyone who does have an office job here. But I started noticing, I started picking up on, I really enjoyed my time there, but a big part of it, was the hospitality aspect that was all around. And most of these people did not have a restaurant background. So challenges in opening people up to new experiences, as I touched on earlier. I think it's less of a challenge and more of an opportunity to be at a restaurant, because I could open all of these bottles up and just have people taste. I can always find a way to sell a glass from a bottle, and given the markup, I at least break even, and I potentially open someone up to becoming a regular, to exploring more, to continue exploring Pinot Noir on their own time and being an active consumer. So all of those are just, I think, opportunities more than anything.
And kind of speaking on language, I know you do quite a bit of work on educating with language
Yes.
in order to open doors. So maybe speak a little bit on that.
Yeah. So I 3 years ago started working with a nonprofit called Corporate Pero Latinos, and it's in the name. We're very much focused on building community. That's one of our pillars through social gatherings, etc. Not so much networking. There's so many groups for that. And we figure that people like to work with people they like. So when you build some sort of, not necessarily friendship, but closeness to someone, opportunities will arise. People want to help each other. And I see that especially in our other pillar, which is philanthropy. One of our missions is to eradicate the barrier to entry with language. So we're at 3 different restaurants across New York so far, where our volunteers were completely volunteer operated. We teach free English classes to hospitality workers, and that's how we keep the focus, but it's open to everyone. But that's really not one of us has a formal training in teaching. It's more about instilling that confidence and letting these people know that they can communicate and that there's a whole world open for them if they just, do so. So that's our focus. And when it comes to wine, the back of the house guys, some of whom are my students, I'll try to inspire curiosity. I'm again from Mexico, and we're not a big wine consuming country. So I'll try to be like, what beer do you like? What, there's the big parallel that we like to draw on the floor is coffee. How do you take your coffee? Maybe you'll like this wine, for example, right? I try to do the same, just listening to what they tell me, and if they're interested. They see us all tasting on the floor. It's a small space, so we get excited about something. They want to be part of that excitement, part of the experience, not necessarily care for the wine. They want to be part of the experience, and that's where I think the focus needs to go back to when it comes to selling, marketing, etc. In regards to wine. It's how do you show that wine can be fun and cool and all those things, and without even having to talk about technical things, which are important, but.
Brand, talk to us a little bit about kind of your values. I mean, you do so much education and you field so many different questions. What's your true north? I mean, you talked a little bit about your background and what sort of got you here, but what's your true north in terms of values as we go forward?
I would say when I'm communicating with consumers about wine, my focus is, and this is sort of, I think you learn this the more you either run a business, are promoting yourself, a service, a product, whatever it is. It's less about you, and it's more about solving someone's problem. right? So I always say that my job is to get you closer to a glass of wine that knocks your socks off. It's not for me to tell you and prove that I did the WSET diploma or that I wrote the Paso Vintage Report for Decanter last month or whatever. I did all that, but it's not like that's not important, you know? So however I can get you closer to that glass of wine, I've done my job. So I was thinking about the Burgundy question that came up, you know, and like, for example, you know, and this answered your question. I mean, the True North is just helping people enjoy wine a bit more. But the Burgundy example, like I would never say in one of my consumer-focused tastings, Burgundian style, never. That would never come out of my mouth. What I'm saying, what I actually mean is that there's a little bit of an earthiness to that, to this wine, which is something that's on the tasting grid. If you've done any of the certifications, that's a note on the grid. But what does that mean? And this is where I talk about jumping off of the grid and into real life. So when I explain earthiness, I've done this so many times. I mean, I've done 300 tasting. I mean, you know, you just sort of, you have all these things in your filing cabinet. Earthiness to me is, if any gardeners in the room, anyone garden here? Right? We're talking about something that grows, right? But you know, when you're gardening and you're out in your little garden and you're on your hands and knees and you've got like maybe some potting soil, you're planting some new things, you're pulling weeds, you've got your gardening gloves on. It's the smell of your gardening gloves when you're done. Earth, dirt. Really. So going back to wine is really not all that romantic all the time. I'm telling you, this wine smells like dirt. That's literally what so that's how I translate it, is I give that real life example that the gardeners, or even if you don't garden, you kind of know you've had your hand in dirt at some point in your life. Maybe you picked up an earthworm when you were little or something and you remember that smell. So that's going to give them that context clue. I'm not going to say, we all know in this room Burgundian in nature, and that's kind of what I was getting to, but that's just a long way of saying that and helping people understand. So I always say it's like high-low. I mean, I spent so much money and so much time on the certifications, and I really don't regret that at all. It gave me such an incredible framework, and it's put me in rooms around the world that are just places that I'm just like, how did I get here? How am I in the room with the people who wrote the Oxford Companion to Wine? Like, how is that? How am I judging with that person? How am I shaking Stephen Spurrier's hand? Or whatever it is, whoever your people are. But it wasn't until during the pandemic when I started doing consumer-facing tastings, all virtual, for corporate groups, meaning I was talking to wine consumers, and the nonstop number one question was, are there really insert cherries and plums, dirt, leather, saddle in the wine? It wasn't until I got knocked back to reality and realized what my true north is. And I was like, oh, you just like want to kind of understand a little bit more so you can go, oh, cool, earthy or whatever, you know? And you just it's just like you watch the little light bulbs go off. And then I also get to stretch the other side of my brain when I do write the highly technical stuff, or sometimes I'll lead a media or trade tasting about a region, which is a little bit more geeky and fun. So it's all about, you know, sharing and enjoying a glass of wine, and it's what I call, it's a sensory experience.
Well, now the pricing of the first wine and the fourth one, the Cluvial, I mean, I almost wish they weren't there for
that would have been fun.
Going back and forth. But even if you're not able with any two given wines to blind the technical aspects of it, you can sniff it, sip it, enjoy it, and think, okay, this belongs in this experience, and this one belongs in this experience. And then again, then you find out the pricing, and then you readjust. But initially, you don't have to. We've all been tasting and eating things since we were born. So it's not really about. You can dig in for yourself, but the more time I spend with wine, the less I find that people want to know these things. And it's really, once again, what we really want is to connect. That's why we're all here today. That's why we'll be here tomorrow. That's why we picked wine, potentially, because it is that means for deeper connection and understanding as humans, and because of all the parallels. That's why I talk about grapes like they're humans. They really, really, it just brings out a different aspect to it. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. And
the other thing is, do I like this? That's the big secret, right? Do you like it? Drink it. That's it. It's really that simple. Do you like it? Enjoy it. Don't create barriers that aren't already there. I think we have a tendency in this industry to gatekeep, and I saw that in the true sales side of things when I worked for a wholesaler, there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of acronyms. I even to this day, I still keep a list of what does DA mean, what does billback mean, what does MOP mean, what is SRP versus RSP? I mean, it's just an endless list. And ultimately, that is a culture that we in this room, and I am confident will break. People gatekeep because they think if they keep the information to themselves, that they will somehow or another have job security, and that's bullshit. You become better at what you do by a community of people that you bring up along with you. So if you have a question around what SRP means, standard retail price, I will send anybody this stupid jargon list I've been teaching for 20 years. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Obviously big on a soapbox there. But my point is that we break that, right? This is our time to say that's stupid. That's a generation of people that did things one way, and we're not here to stand for that, and we're gonna operate in a different way. And we do that every single day by communicating with one another. So for our last little exercise, because I'm so inspired by what we've been talking about in terms of flavor profile, tasting note, each one of you take a moment and think about a smell or an experience or a person or a thing, and smell one of these 4 wines and write down what that is. Does any one of these wines have a smell in it that reminds you of a place or a person or a thing or a food that you wouldn't typically find on the chart, right? I love this exercise because it reminds us that wine is a living, breathing thing, and it all really is about our personal experience, and it takes away our ego in it, and instead it gives us back to the wine. So as we're doing that, we have time for about 5 more minutes for any other questions, if there are any, and then of course you can come chat with us at the panel afterward. Any final questions?
What's your favorite wine out of the 4?
Nope, not falling for that one, not falling for that one. Not falling for that one. I mean, and truly, for me, it is really easy to answer this question to a certain extent. When it comes to Pinot Noir, it really depends. Depends on what I'm in the mood for, because they are all so different. It's not like they're different vintages, they're different growing regions, they're different price points. It depends. Do I like one of them chilled on a beach in Hawaii? Maybe. Do I like one of them with like a bigger salmon dish because that just sounds like a delicious dinner? Maybe. And that's what I like about Pinot.
It's kind of like picking dinner between tacos or chalupas or.
You're like, it depends. Like,
essentially, it's the same
for?
thing. It's corn, maize, and then the meat. But yeah, they feel different. So.
Well, before we wrap up, all 3 of us are going to stand up, and we're going to thank Lydia and Gabby and Maria. Thank you. It takes a lot of hard work to put these events together, down to glassware, table mat, I mean, everything. And these ladies have been working their tails off, and we thank you so much for creating this space for us. So with that, salud. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.